You're listening to Investigation Insiders by Integris Intelligence.
Hello again, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Investigation Insiders. This is Forhad. I hope you are all well and safe. We are very lucky today to be joined by our friend, New York City Fire Commissioner Robert Tucker. Thank you so much for joining us, Robert. How are you doing today?
Oh, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. It's a long time in the making. So Robert and I go back many years. Robert, you're probably not even going to remember this, but we first met, and I keep notes on all this stuff. We first met at the ASIS New York City trade show in 2003. You might recall I worked for Guardsmark at the time. Obviously, you were running T&M protection resources at the time. You guys still had the dogs. And so I remember you just happened to be there as I was walking around with a colleague of mine, and the dogs are what drew me to the booth. And so I came over and said hello. Needless to say, I'm very glad we did that, and it was sort of the beginning of the relationship that has now spanned over unbelievably 20 years. So just for everyone's knowledge, T&M has been a great supporter, advocate, and partner of ours. And Robert has been a mentor and truly, I mean, I say this to you all the time privately, but has set the blueprint for a successful security and investigations firm. So I say it to you privately all the time, but I'm glad to be able to say it publicly that I'm very appreciative for everything that you've done for me personally and our company over the years. Thank you.
It's my pleasure. Look, this is a wonderful industry that I used to work in. Obviously, I'm now working full-time for the city of New York and the 8.5 million people that the FDNY serves. But the security and investigations industry has come a long way. And I would say, in large part, it's come a long way because of professionals like you and other colleagues of ours who have really made it something much more than it was back at that As Is show.
Sure. No, I absolutely. And so, you know what? Much of the audience is actually going to probably know you, but I think it's you have had a really neat career. So I'd like to just kind of take it back a little bit to kind of talking about, when did you become an attorney, and talk about a little bit of your time at the Queen's DA's office, if you could.
So I became an attorney. I was sworn in 1996. However, I had a summer internship in 1991 with the late, great Richard A. Brown, the Queen's DA. And during that summer, the summer of 91, he was appointed DA June 1st, 1991 by Mario Cuomo to fill an interim seat that was vacated by John Santucci. And I was fortunate enough to go work for him in that summer. And by the end of that summer, he and I had really hit it off. And my interest in public safety goes back way before that. But I was eager to help him build first-rate office, but also build relationships in the law enforcement community that office just didn't have. And so that was of particular interest to him, and we became very close as a result of that, and he hired me back, and I went to law school at night while I worked full-time in the Queen's DA's office for him, and ultimately graduated from Pace University Law School actually I graduated a semester early, so in January of 1996.
It's interesting. I don't know if people would have guessed that she worked full time and went to law school. So that's kind of neat. And then, do you have a favorite moment from your time at the Queen's DA's office?
Until until I became the New York City Fire Commissioner, I used to say that there will not be a job that will be more exciting than working literally next to the chief law enforcement officer of the most diverse county in the country.
Right.
I've topped it now, but I would say that there are some fabulous moments that I recall. Epic moments, airplane crashes, and homicides, multiple homicides, and lots of sophisticated organized crime investigations. I mean, Queens County is really something else. You have two major airports there. You have a major league baseball team there. You have a tennis stadium that hosts probably the foremost tennis tournament in the world, the U.S. Open. You have the bedroom community of organized crime in Howard Beach. You have the financial community in Long Island City. You have the largest population of Asians in any county. Actually, more Asians live in Queens than in any other county in New York City combined. It's just you have York College. It's just an unbelievable place to both be a prosecutor and an investigator.
You know what? As a lifelong Queens resident, I actually got to see the transition that took place. I guess even that started even before your time with the Queens DA's office, and then through your time there. And I'll tell you what, that particular office, did a lot of good in sort of cleaning up what was, again, a safe borough relative to the rest of the city, but still had its challenges, right?
Well, yeah, we came in during the crack epidemic, and homicides, crime was really out of control.
Yeah.
And we lived through a decline in crime, for which I take some credit. But you had mayors like Dinkins and Giuliani who were different, no doubt. But Mayor Dinkins deserves some credit for adding police officers to the streets, and then Mayor Giuliani, is notorious for his crime fighting.
Sure.
And we were able to enforce the law, which was very much on the people's side, and had a lot of success. There were a lot of really great assistant district attorneys and cops in Queens.
Sure.
And I was very fortunate enough to work with them.
Yep. So then you transitioned out from the DA's office into the private sector. Can you talk a little bit about, I guess, how that all happens?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly didn't have to leave. Judge Brown stayed for more than 20 years after I left. But I had an entrepreneurial bug, and I had an opportunity to build a business, T&M, which initially focused on security guarding in New York City. We expanded quickly to explosive detection canines, which you talked about.
Yep.
We then, in partnership with a dear friend of mine, Bob Silbering, the special narcotics prosecutor for the city of New York, built a world-class investigative capability. And in 2013, we sold our security guarding business to Steve Jones at Allied.
Yep.
and we continue to stay very focused on investigations, security consulting, and executive protection. We brought on Joe Russo from the U.S. Secret Service, who was the special agent in charge of the Clinton division. And Joe and I built, what I would say is the best executive protection program in the country available to the private sector. And the tradition is carried on by a number of great Secret Service executives leading offices for T&M in Boston and Washington, D.C., New York, and Florida. And we're now doing work all over the world in partnership with a business I built in Israel, which does a lot of the same things. So T&M is different looking today and different acting today, but really operates like a small business in that the leadership there is accessible and available, and we're customizing approaches to security and investigations that fit our individual clients.
Sure. I got to tell you, I know how much you love that business, and I think it's only the fire commissioner position of New York City that could have taken you away from that. So I mean that says a lot about, again, the position and the role and everything that you're doing now. One thing
I want to just say that I always felt like I would come back to government at some point. This of course was a dream come true job, but I didn't have the bug out of me completely in 1999 when I went to T&M. I knew I would come back, and so having the opportunity to run the largest fire department in the country and the greatest fire department in the world is just as I said, a dream come true and the honor of a lifetime.
Sure. And that actually leads me to my next sort of question and comment. So again, going back to 2003, I remember after meeting you, seeing how you were hustling to keep your clients happy, to create new partnerships, win business, and all those sorts of things. I remember seeing, and in fact, and I've told you this many times, it's something that we've tried to emulate. And so I think people can often look at the end result. And, you're talking about like three positions that like three people, thousands of people cannot dream to aspire to, and you've held them, right? And so, but what happens with that sometimes is people don't realize how difficult the journey could be, right? And I was hoping you can talk a little bit about the early years and some of the difficulties that you faced as an entrepreneur.
Yeah, well, thank you for pointing that out and recognizing that. I think you're right. I think, guys like you and me and a few others smile a lot and make it look very easy. And I admit it's far from easy to build a company like T&M, like yours, and there are others.
Yep.
I would say that I worked tirelessly, 7 days a week.
Yep.
Often 18, 20 hours a day. There were lots of hurdles. I think the first hurdle I faced in 1999 was that I wasn't a cop.
Yep.
I was coming into a business that was, predominantly filled with retired police officers, not only in the ownership, but in the workforce. And so I had to gain the respect of a community that really only respected their own. And that's changed rather remarkably now, but nevertheless, that hurdle was significant. And then, of course, living through September 11th in a business that was operated downtown, south of Canal Street, whose biggest client was the New York Stock Exchange, who had no power, no phones, and no access to their office space. That really was, for many reasons, time that's unforgettable as an entrepreneur, trying to keep things together, trying to work with banks, trying to work with customers and their demands at that point, trying to work with the threats around the stock exchange and getting it opened again. That's really an unforgettable time in my life. And then over the years, we have had all sorts of peaks and valleys as a business. Did I sell it too soon to Steve in 2013? Why didn't I expand as he did from a small business in Los Angeles east to New York and all over the world? Did I miss opportunities to travel with my customers to new cities at their request that I turned down? I often think about things I could have done differently, while appreciating that the business became very successful. And I think the best compliment for T&M and for me as an entrepreneur is that I could leave it as I have, and it's the heartbeat continues, and it's doing better without me, which hurts my feelings, but also says something to the fact that I built something, with a very solid foundation, and that's very sustainable.
Yeah, 100%. There's no doubt about that. And I would argue to your first point about being from outside of law enforcement and coming into it, and then even though you did have a law enforcement background, not being a police officer, but with the Queens DA's office, I would argue that you helped change the mindset and the acceptance of people like me in the industry. So just another sort of accomplishment that I think just can easily get overlooked, right? So what are some of your most memorable moments from your time at T&M? Is there one or two things that you can point? I know that's a really hard question.
I mean, we at T&M, as you know, we've been involved in almost everything that has happened in the country, in the world. I mean, I often joke that if it's on the front page of the New York Times, T&M's involved in it. but I do remember standing on Broad and Wall Street in front of the stock exchange, waiting for the year 2000 to click in, because you might recall everybody was so worried about what would happen. Computers that were running the world at that point, certainly the financial world. I remember there sort of standing at 11:58 thinking, 2 minutes from the end of the world. I certainly remember the hurricane and the flooding down there. I remember working with some celebrities over the years, many of whom are now household names. They may not have been then. They were on their journey to the top of their careers, and spending time with them. I remember working with a senator from Chicago who had aspirations to become something more, and did. But when he was a senator and would come to New York, we would support him. There are just so many times investigations that we conducted that by hard work and some luck turned out to uncover smoking gun that caused our client to win big or get themselves the victory they were looking for. There are just so many things that T&M touched over the time that I've been there. But I will say that it happened to me on this past Friday, and it happens all the time.
Yeah.
I run into security officers all over the city who stop me and they say, Robert, I started at Lehman Brothers, 745 7th Avenue, or I started my career. I used to, when I was a young rookie cop, I was working off duty for you at the stock exchange.
Right.
And people, we've touched so many lives, and now in my current capacity, I've met many EMTs and paramedics and firefighters who say, you know, Commish, you won't believe this, but I worked at T&M in 1998 or 2006. So, you know, it's just, T&M has touched so many lives, and I'm really proud of that.
You should be. I mean, you should be, and you know, that's just a fantastic recap. And I'm happy to be able to just hear that from you directly. So let's talk about the role you're in now, right? Can you talk a little bit about becoming fire commissioner? And so now I know it's been a dream of yours your whole life, or for a long time. Now that you're in it, is it still a dream come true?
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, this job delivers joy for me and a lot of other people every single day. And I have to thank Mayor Adams and some of his top advisors for giving me this opportunity. Dreams really don't always come true. And when they do, they ought to feel exactly like this. And I'm making a concerted effort to really appreciate every second of this job, knowing that it's mine today, but I have an obligation, maybe soon, maybe not soon, to turn it over someone else in a better place than when I arrived here in August. And I've assembled a management team of really fabulous fire and EMS chiefs, and I have been supported tremendously by City Hall. And I know we're delivering, a real high quality service to the people of the city of New York. And I say service because, like T&M, we are in the service business at the fire department. And I am the CEO of the fire department. I'm also the commissioner, but I'm trying to approach the management of this huge public safety agency as its CEO, and bringing in technology and management metrics and things, frankly, that private sector accountability that hasn't existed here.
Sure.
And I will tell you that the men and women of this department are taking well to it. It's definitely new. The pace at which I operate has always been fast, and I think it's faster than my predecessors, say my colleagues. And we have a lot of work to do, forgetting about the fact that we're in the business of saving people's lives. We have a lot of work to do here to get it better and better and better, and that's really what I'm focused on.
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you what, just as a citizen of the city, it's great to hear all that, and it's great to hear that you love the position that you're in and that you enjoy doing it every day, because inevitably that's going to benefit all of us. So, and just kind of a funny thing as you talk, thinking about, you mentioned T&M and the front of the newspaper, and being involved in many things that ended up there. I would argue that, in your current role, staying off that front page is a sign of success, and you're managing to do that pretty well. So knock on wood, it continues to stay that way.
Yeah, it's been one of look, we're an incident away from that changing.
Sure.
I'm aware of that, but it has been one of my goals, both because of where I stand personally at this point in my life,
Yep.
at age 55, but also, you know, I'm not doing this for that purpose.
Sure.
You know, my legacy and who I am, you know, is somewhat formed already. I didn't do this to resume build or legacy build. I can authentically show up at the fire department every single day and do what I think is the right thing to do without a lot of interference from other factors. And that's a wonderful luxury that I don't take for granted, but I feel very, very grateful for.
Yeah, I mean, that's amazing. And you know, like I said, I think that's great for all of us here in the city. So, all right, one last question before we dive into sort of the topic of the episode. Can you talk quickly about who have been some of your mentors along the way?
You know, I'm thinking about that, and I mean, obviously, Judge Brown was a mentor of mine, but I have been a student of New York City politics and government, you know, since my mom worked for Mayor Koch,
Right.
and I was a little boy. And I've admired so many people and their management styles and their graciousness and their gratitude and how they approached these jobs. You know, these jobs are awesomely powerful. And I don't say that because I'm in it. I say that because I'm you know, I say that because I'm in it. But the truth is, you know, you can't let these jobs go to your head. You have to remember who you are and who, you know, where you came from, and who you work for, who you serve. And I have had over the years a lot of mentors that taught me to keep my eye on that ball.
Sure. No, I think that's a great answer, and I think you're right. So we recently had the privilege of attending a police athletic league lunch a few months back where Robert was honored. He made some comments during his speech that is sort of the inspiration for this episode, security and safety being a shared responsibility. So, Robert, as sort of leading up to these questions, I think it's safe to say that you are in a unique position from the standpoint of having been an attorney, worked in the DA's office, run a very successful business, and now being the fire commissioner to talk about this topic. So, can we talk first of all, like, what's the mission of the fire department of New York?
Look, I mean, our mission is to save lives and protect property, but the truth is that we have to work with others, especially in an urban setting like New York, where so much about fire safety is handled by others. You know, when you think about the biggest, tallest, most grand buildings in New York City, you have to remember there are fire safety directors and people who work in those buildings, for those buildings, who really are on the front line of public safety. The security officers who greet you, the security officers who print your badge to go upstairs, as I said, the fire and life safety personnel. And so the FDNY plays a critical role both proactively and reactively in fire safety in New York City with our Bureau of Fire Prevention and our inspection programs and our certification of Class E systems and things like that. But in the end of the day, having a working smoke detector in your house is as important to me as anything, because I want you out of that apartment or private house if there's smoke. And we've seen, even on Easter weekend, tragedies where multiple people get killed in a house fire that doesn't have a working smoke detector. I will make an observation about this job. I tend to talk about things like, make sure the battery in your smoke detector is working. Please don't park on fire hydrants. Like, things that I am baffled by. I have to message over and over and over again. We've had 2 fatal fires recently where the hydrants right in front of the fire building itself are blocked by people who decided to use that as a parking space. Not run inside, the hazards are on, which I don't want you to do either. But I'm talking about parking there. One of them was parked there so long the car was booted. So I don't know. I mean, sometimes I think we're climbing a hill that's just too steep. If that's going to be what I have to focus on. But hopefully New Yorkers hear me. There are a lot of challenges, and we talk about them, and I try to talk to whoever will listen to me about some of the messaging.
I got to tell you, that's part of what you talked about at that lunch, and it's shocking. I think just to listen to, like, this is pretty low hanging fruit that, again, you don't have to be in law enforcement or corporate security or fire safety to help with, right? And if it saves lives, I mean, and it's part of the reason why I wanted you on. So what are, like, what do you see as your role, and what are your top priorities and goals during, however long you're in this role?
Yeah, well, look, I'm running the most, I would argue, one of the most important public safety agencies in the world. And the FDNY is an all-hazards agency, so we're not just putting out fires, but we're in charge of pre-hospital care, our ambulance services in New York City. We're in charge of, we have a very sophisticated hazardous materials response capability. We have a very large marine division with several of the largest fireboats in the world. We are operating a fire marshal's division that is investigating the cause and origin of all of the fires in New York. We're very involved in the enforcement around lithium-ion batteries, which are causing catastrophic fires, although fire deaths related to lithium-ion batteries are way down because, I believe, of our messaging. This job, and of course we are fighting fires all over the city when they happen. My job is to make sure we're doing all of that at the highest level of professionalism possible. The other thing that I talked about at the PAL luncheon is EMS, and I want to spend as much time as I can with you pointing out that while the men and women who are the EMTs and paramedics of the FDNY are truly the greatest, that is a system that I have called the biggest crisis in public safety that nobody's talking about now. I am now talking about it, and others are talking about it now because I'm talking about it. But unless we give some real serious attention how we service the population of people who who need emergency medical care prior to going to the hospital, that system's going to collapse. And one of the reasons it's going to collapse is because nobody is distinguishing when you call 911 versus when you should be. And so we're responding to more than 1.6 million calls a year for service. That's a staggering number of calls for service. And when we get there, we're finding people with boo-boos. And we're finding people who are using our system for transportation purposes alone. And I'm not going to tolerate that, because what we're also seeing is people who are acutely ill, who need our service quickly, who cannot get it because we are so bogged down in this boo-boo response. And we've got to, and I'm working really hard now with a lot of partners in a lot of different ways to try to solve that problem.
Yeah, that was, you just led right into my next question about the responsiveness related to people calling 911. So can you talk a little bit about how you all are working with other agencies and how important that is?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that the police department and the fire department are working more closely together than we ever have. But it's not just the police department. It's so many other city agencies. And I do think that the development of a deputy mayor for public safety and Mayor Adams' vision around that, and frankly, the cooperation between the deputy mayor for public safety and the deputy mayor for operations. We're working with sanitation, with DCAS, with parks. We're working with the Department of Buildings. We're working with so many other agencies that I didn't mention. But we're working together hand in glove. I mean, I am talking to my colleagues in other agencies every single day about how we can work together to become a force multiplier in delivering more services with the same amount of resources to the people of New York City.
As you talk about that, Robert, I think that brings us sort of full circle on where I just feel, and I'm sure many others feel, about your prior experiences. For me specifically, thinking about you running T&M and all that is required to run a business like that, and you're in tune to working with others, working efficiently, managing things fiscally, responsibly, all those sorts of things. I see that all resonating into what you're doing now. And can you just comment on that a little bit, how your previous experience just really lends itself well to what you're doing now?
Yeah, I view this job as being the CEO of a big company.
Yeah.
We have more than 17,000 employees.
Yeah.
We have a multi-billion-dollar budget. We are critical to the ecosystem of New York City every single day. And the buck really stops at my desk for everything. Very early on in my tenure, I was at a fire. It was August. I was at a fire. I had just become fire commissioner. And a guy came up to me and he said, "How does it feel to be in charge of this?" And I said, "Well, really, the chief is in charge." And he said, "No, I hate to tell you, Commissioner, you're in charge." And that was a very humbling moment for me, where I realized the enormity of this job and the responsibility that I have, and it feels great. I have a tremendous team of people I rely on very heavily because I've never been a firefighter or an EMT or a paramedic. I know the lanes I can add tremendous value to, and I know lanes that I don't add any value to, and I try to stay in my lane. But I also understand that everything that happens here, bad and good, is my responsibility, and I take it very seriously. And I hope that in some ways I'm making a positive difference here.
Sure. No, I mean, that's refreshing again to hear from just a citizen of the city perspective. So to kind of lead into the conclusion here, again, the what is safety and security being a shared responsibility? Can we just talk about that at a high level, and what can private companies do to and really the general public do to help the mission of the FDNY? If we could sort of conclude with those two things. Yep.
Well, yeah. I mean, I do think it's a shared. The public safety of this city is not just the job of the fire department and the police, and it's not just the job of city agents. I really do think that there are tangible examples of public-private partnerships that I think are really working. One that comes to mind is one that I was very involved in getting started, and that's the shared camera network down what we used to call the Lower Manhattan Security Initiative, where private companies contribute their CCTV fields to the NYPD Counterterrorism Division. And sitting in a command center are both cops and representatives from private security. And that was something that I worked very closely with Commissioner Ray Kelly and others to create after 9/11. But it's a perfect example of the public-private partnership that is alive and well in public safety. Look, from the fire department's perspective, we want building fire safety directors and fire guards to make sure that the public is aware of the codes that they are enforcing, that we promulgate, and that hazardous behavior, whether it's cooking in a place where you're not supposed to have a hot plate, or not having a smoke detector, or not having a working sprinkler system, or not having a working Class E alarm system, or just overuse of extension cords and the like. That really starts at the private sector level, and then we inspect it for code violation. But we can't, in the end of the day, with new construction and the codes that the fire department has in place, this is a safer fire safer city than it has been. But we still worry a lot about the public's safety. And I realize, again, the enormity of my job in having to lead the greatest fire department in the world to keep the 8.5 million people of New York safe, and all of the visitors that come here as well.
Well, that's a really good way to conclude, Robert. I know we've run over on time already, so I just want to thank you again for really all of the service that you've done, both on the public and private side. Thank you for your friendship, and thank you for your mentorship. And we look forward. I'm certainly excited about what the future holds for you, and I'm sure others are as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for what you do and for our friendship, which I value immensely.
Well, and to everyone that's tuning in, thank you for the support. Till next time.
Don't forget to follow us. We are on LinkedIn and Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube.